Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to the State of Systemic Design panel discussion. Today's panel discussion is to help us understand how the field of systemic design is evolving, its past, present, and future. The session is hosted by the SI Design Hub. My name is Roma Pataria. I'm joining from Hubli, a small town close to Bangalore in India. I work as program manager with the SI network. And with me, we have Joss. Joss is the founder of the SI network. He's joining us from London today. He works as ecosystem builder and community developer as well. We also have the third member. Her name is Giselle. She'll be eventually joining us from Brazil. She's a systems and design thinker. Uh, Thank you so much, everybody, for taking time and joining us for this session. Really looking forward to all the amazing discussions that will unfold in this session. So this session is a result of one of the guides that we launched this year. It's called the State of Systemic Design and the Unofficial Guide 2026. Here we try to give an overview of the state of systemic design, what are the organizations, individuals, and um, courses, everything that contributes to development of this field. So we will be sharing the link to this guide in comment space very soon. And we are very fortunate to have three experts today with us from a systemic design field who've worked in this field for many years. We have Alex joining us from Toronto. He is a thought and practice leader in designing for systems change. He has experience launching, leading, and advising social innovation labs inside and outside government. He has also led and participated in over 100 systemic design projects. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks
And
very much.
thank you. Next up, we have Palak Dudani. She's joining us from Oslo, Norway. She is a transdisciplinary designer and researcher based in Oslo, Norway, specializing in the intersection of design system and futures. Her work often addresses social systems, healthcare, and future of urban life through a systemic approach. Welcome, Palak. Thank you so much again for taking time and joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
And lastly, we have Mika with us. She's joining us from Netherlands. She is a prominent researcher, educator, and designer specializing in social innovation and systemic design. Mika currently serves as an associate professor at the Delft University of Technology, TU Delft. Thank you for joining us, Mika. Welcome to today's session.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So, quick housekeeping notes. The session will go on for 60 minutes. It's going to be interactive in the sense we'll have question answers for the last 10 minutes of the session where you could unmute and ask your questions. And the session is being recorded just in case you've missed any part of it. We will be sharing the recording on YouTube, LinkedIn, and our website as well. So the agenda for today is we have an introduction, and then we'll have question answers. We have precisely 4 questions for the panel. And then towards the end, we have a Q&A session, and then we'll have an outro for the last part where we'll also introduce our next event. All right, so let's jump into our first question with that. Okay. So to begin, would like to get your brief introduction. Tell us about your expertise, industry experience, notable projects, and the places you worked. Would you like to go first, Alex?
Thanks, Roma. Hi, I'm Alex Ryan. I'm based in Toronto at the moment, originally from Australia. And this feels like a bit of a coming of age for me because I really started using the term systemic design 18 years ago. So it feels like it's kind of now at a point where there's this whole ecosystem that your report kind of mentions. So I first got into systemic design working in the military context. The US Army was one of the early adopters. And when they were losing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we helped to change the kind of traditional top-down waterfall planning processes to introduce more systemic and design-led approaches, and that was back in 2008. I then moved to Alberta to set up the first provincial government lab in Canada using systemic design. And that's where we proved out that this approach could apply to all kinds of complex policy challenges across government. In 2017, I moved to Toronto to take over the Mars Solutions Lab, which was doing the same kind of work, but now doing it cross-sector from outside of government to do real big systems change like youth employment and climate action. And for the last 3 years, I've been full-time in Syntheticos, my own global systemic design practice, working on a range of challenges from health hospital discharge process redesign through to regional agricultural regenerative kind of strategies in the Pacific. So a few of the projects I've worked on.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing. Would you like to go next, Palak?
Yeah, sure. My way to systemic design has been a bit of a long, winding, explorative journey. I began as an industrial design practitioner in my bachelor's, and then found myself working more with service design. In those early years, I was working with a design studio in India with clients like Gates Foundation and International Rescue Committee, and that sort of created it opened up my interest into working with complex conditions. And I did a couple of fellowships when I was placed in a small town north of India as part of I think it's called I think they've changed their names, but now it's the Clinton Foundation Fellowship. And having that sort of mixed bag experience, I think it was quite a teachable moment for me to realize that I'm interested in systemic design. And I found my way into I came to Oslo. I'm thinking about too many things at the same time. I came to Oslo, and then I did my master's in systemic design. And I worked as an academic researcher for a couple of years as part of a EU project where we worked on futures literacies with students and teachers and PhD researchers. And I got to dabble a little bit on the academic side of things. And then I joined Fjord for a few years where we worked with private and public sector clients. And now I'm working with an energy company because I'm keen to work with climate change and energy transition. And I'm now looking at how more legacy organizations can move away from oil and gas into working with renewables. So that's a quick intro.
Thank you, Palak. That's amazing. You have a wide range of experience. Thank you for sharing, Palak. Meek, we would like to hear from you.
Yes, thanks. So my name is Mieke van der Bijl-Brouwer. I'm based in Delft in the Netherlands, and I have a background in product design, more specifically human-centered design. I moved to Australia in 2013 because I wanted to expand my work in design towards the public and social sector, and there was an opportunity to do that in Australia. And there I worked at the Design Innovation Research Centre at the University of Technology, Sydney. And what we were doing there, we were applying design as a way of working to complex societal challenges. And at a certain point, I was advising a student and colleague, Bridget Malcolm, and she was applying design in a regulatory context. And she told me that she had been reading a lot about this thing called systemic design by people like Alex Ryan and Peter Stewardson. And she says there's this conference called RSD, Relating Systems Thinking and Design, and I think we should go. And basically I said to Bridget, well, I don't think you should do that because, it's already complicated enough just to apply design in a regulatory context. But anyway, she managed to convince me anyway. And we went to RSD in Toronto in 2016, I think it was, which is where I met Alex, Birger, and everyone else. Maybe I also met Palak there. So I became part of this wonderful community that is now the Systemic Design Association. So that's where I also started expanding my work from design to involving systems thinking and complexity theory and other things. We moved back to the Netherlands in 2019, where I worked at TU Delft. And whilst I was TU Delft, I also started to apply my work in systemic design and systems thinking within the academic system, because I think the academic system has lots of challenges that should be approached systemically. But I also felt I was really reaching a limit there, because the system puts so much pressure on you. Everyone who is in academia knows this, that there was very little time to actually do research. Now, Alex had once given me the advice that you can also be an academic and not work in a university if you apply more of a consultancy model, where you just do like 2 days a week consultancy and then the rest of the week you do research. And that's actually what I'm doing now, and it works out quite well. So my consultancy work is mostly focused on design in relation to public sector. So we work a lot with government in the Netherlands, who also are trying to think in different ways. And then my research is mostly focused on a book that I'm writing that's nearly finished. Maybe I can tell a little bit more about that, but it's more about the intersection of design and complexity theory. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Mika, for sharing that. We could move on to our first question. The question is, how would you tell the story of systems design over the last 20 to 30 years, its evolution, key shifts, and defining moments? So we could start with you, Mika, this time.
Yeah, or with Alex, because he just mentioned that he's used the word systemic design for 18 years, which is much longer than that I've done.
Okay, I'm happy to kick us off, and then Mika can provide an academic lens to kind of look maybe a little broader. I'll look at it through the practitioner lens. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I first started using this term in 2008. I met a US Army general, and he said, I just finished a PhD in complex system science. The title was A Multidisciplinary Approach to Complex Systems Design. So I'd been looking in my thesis about bringing design and systems theory together, particularly complex system science. And then, I met this US Army general, and he said, you ought to come out to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and see this thing that we're calling systemic operational design. And so it was bringing together systems theory with human-centered design, with operational art, which in the military is the field that joins strategy to tactics. So it was all about that mediation between the tactical level of war and the strategic level of war. And it was because of the limitations of traditional top-down planning processes, the kind of complexity we were seeing on the asymmetric battlefield was really what was driving this change in thinking. And when I got to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, they were doing military planning in a way that I'd never seen planning being done before. Usually it's a very analytical, structured, hierarchical process. People had, books like 1,000 Plateaus. They had Foucault. They were reading architectural theory. They were reading systems theory, and they were drawing all of these big spaghetti diagrams to map out the complexity of operational challenges. And so it was a really interesting challenge to bring this new approach into an organization of 1 million people. And I first brought it into the schoolhouse at the School of Advanced Military Studies, and then helped to write the doctrine to get this out to the 1 million-person organization. And then I went around for 5 years to different headquarters like Special Operations Command, Strategic Command, Cyber Command, to stand up these strategic design teams that would take on the most complex challenges. It was in 2012 we held the first of the RSD, Relating Systems Thinking and Design conferences. And that was really where I realized that there was this whole field emerging. It wasn't just the work we'd been doing in the military, but there were people across all different sectors. The Oslo School of Architecture and Design, OCAD University Strategic Foresight and Innovation program here in Toronto, the work of Harold Nelson. There were some key thinkers who had been bringing these two fields together. And we initially held RSD 12 RSD1 in 2012. The point was we were actually going to write an edited book together. And we never actually wrote the book, but we did spawn this very successful conference series that kind of that built the field. And then when I moved into government, I really wanted to show that this approach could apply beyond the military into general public policy. And that's why we did these kind of 100 projects with a design team inside of government across a 4-year period. And I think we were very successful in kind of institutionalizing it and building it beyond like a one-off into a repeatable structure. So that was kind of like where I saw the early days. And I would say in the early days when we were trying to explain this very different way of going about policy making and strategy building, we were very focused on tools and methods. Everyone was building toolkits, and we published the Follow the Rabbit guide in the Alberta CoLab, which is still an open source publication you can download. And there's the Systemic Design Toolkit that we published as well, again, an open resource. So it was very much focused on the how of mashing up systems thinking and design thinking so we could bring those two together. So that's kind of how I would kind of characterize the last decade of systemic design. Mika?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. That's actually what I was going to say as well. The method focus has been quite strong. So from my vantage point, there's a couple of different trends that I've seen in the field of systemic design. So one part is about the use of visualizations and designing visualizations as a sense-making tool. So, for example, as is done in systems-oriented design and giga mapping, there's lots of different tools that enable designers to make sense of complexity and then to use that sense of complexity in their design process, either through what is called system shifting design or system conscious design. So when you're more conscious of kind of the complexity of a challenge that you're facing, then you're better able to deal with unintended consequences or if you are better able to make sense of the complexity you're facing, you also can be more strategic in kind of how you intervene, if you want to use a technical term. And then there's a second trend emerging that we can refer to as designing from within. So from this perspective, we see systems as consisting of people, of residents, and they kind of design and redesign that system from within. So for example, you can think of a doctor that is creating a form, or you can think of, I don't know, a teacher who is redesigning the classroom, or it can be a manager who is redesigning the rules of engagement. So if we think of complex systems in that way, design plays different roles. So design plays a role because everyone's always designing, regardless of it, or if you call it design or not. But then there's also kind of a meta level design, which kind of helps people design and redesign those systems from within. And then more recently, in line with that approach, which in service design is called service ecosystem design, there's also so-called more relational approach. So that's much more about how we relate to each other. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, because that's also connected to mindset. So not so much about how. I think Birger Sivatsson, he calls it mindset. I would say it's also like a worldview. How we see the world has profound impact on what we design, and that's something that's, I think, fundamental to everything we do, and also something I think we need to explore further in the future. So my area of expertise is mostly in the kind of more the social domain, so health, well-being, welfare, behavior change, those kind of areas. Maybe Palak, you can talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in your domain, which is more in sustainability and energy.
Absolutely. I'm just listening to both of you and thinking about that you've covered almost all of it. So it's it's a great way to describe how things have been so far. I think the practice space, which Alex has covered quite well, a lot of it does lean towards, business as usual, the same ways of doing things. Like you want to be more efficient, you want to save money, you want to um, hold on to the advantages that you have as an industry or as a business. So, for example, in the energy sector, even though we know that we need to transition, there is still a lot of resistance towards letting go of maybe an oil and gas way of doing things, an oil and gas mindset, because that has been so profitable and so beneficial for people to do things that way. And I think that reflects so well in the way we practice systemic design as well. And I think you briefly mentioned this, Mika, like the world view of things, like how do we see the world? So I wanted to just point out that, we find our ways to systemic design in different ways. And as a practitioner, you might find that design tools are not up to the task of dealing with complexity. The traditional systemic design tools, like you mentioned, like visualizations, methods, sometimes they also fall short, that they're not able to really dig deep enough to understand what are the logics operating underneath. And that's kind of where the ontology and epistemology world comes in. Like, how do we know what we know? And do we know how we think about things? And being able to challenge the worldview, that sort of takes us towards the decolonization view of things, or more imagination infrastructuring kind of things. So playing with mindsets and metaphors can be a way to sort of say, okay, if we imagine things in this new way, what kind of opportunities does it open up? Can we, like, is this the only way to think about generative AI? Like, can that idea of commons, of extracting commons, so it benefits a few handful of people, is that colonialism 2.0, or is that something? Are we repeating what we've been doing the past few centuries? But if we don't understand the worldview way of thinking, we will that part will be hidden from us. So it's hard to join the dots on all the things that we have seen so far, because things don't happen in a linear way. Um, but these are all evolving areas of scholarship, and we learn so much from disciplines outside of design, right? I mean, initially design has, like, a lot of what we know of design has come initially from cybernetics or biology or even physics. So I think as we move towards future, I think futures literacy and moving away from business as usual. Yeah, there's a space for these discussions and these join ups. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but I'm trying to weave these thoughts together into something that people might find interesting.
That's absolutely perfect, Palak, for showing us the complexity. I'm sure it's not super easy to answer in a simple way because it's a complex idea. Thank you, Alex, for highlighting on how the tools have been developed, and Mika for how it's all about the way we look at the world, and Palak for showing us the complexity here. We can move on to the next question. So where do you think we are today in systems design? Both in theory and in practice. So which sector and functions do you think are currently applying it most? And where do you see these gaps and missed opportunities? Would you like to tell us, Alex, what you think?
Sure. Yeah, it's it's an interesting point right now. Like the world itself is in a really weird place. Like it's just like with all of the volatility and all the disruption happening. So I think like I can comment from my own practice in terms of I mentioned in kind of like the first decade of systemic design, it was really about documentation of like we have this new way of doing things and we're trying to build out the toolkit and the methods to show people that there are different ways to structure conversation and dialogue and generative mapping and intervention into systems. And I think like today, like we're not judged by the elaborateness of the systems map we can build. We're judged by like what results we can deliver. So like it's very much moved beyond like demonstrating the how and focusing on the process, and more about the outcomes and the why we're doing it. And so having the intentionality and being able to drive impact at scale. Um, so, as I mentioned, like the last 3 years, one of my big projects has been out in Nova Scotia. We've been redesigning the discharge process. It's easy to get people admitted into hospital. It can be very hard to get them home. And 1 in 5 people in the healthcare system in Nova Scotia, they're in hospitals. They're medically stable, but there are barriers from getting them home, whether it's their mental health or physical disability, but there's something that's preventing them from being discharged from hospital. And so that's tying up a lot of resources in the system, and it's also exposing people to hospital-acquired harms. So like there's a lot of reasons we want to get people home sooner, but it's not actually the hospital system that has the leverage points for that. It belongs in different parts of government. So we built a systemic design co-design process that started with an international learning journey to look at discharge hubs and processes overseas. We did ethnographic research. We spoke to patients and frontline health providers. And we built a governance structure that allowed 6 different government departments and agencies to co-design together. And through this process, it wasn't just service redesign, it was whole system transformation. We designed 3 new policies. We built pooled funding across 6 different departments, all agreeing to share their resources so that the money could follow the patient and not the program. Um, we redesigned a governance structure, so we had multi-level governance and escalation management teams for rapid escalation of complex care cases. We built physical co-location hubs that brought the siloed agencies together to coordinate wraparound healthcare. We prototyped new service delivery and concierge services to get people home sooner with complex needs with the supports that they needed. We experimented with deployable tech that could help people have virtual hospital at home. And we shifted the way that data and information flows connected across the system. And we went through the full arc from initial research and discovery through to participatory co-design, through to building a portfolio of prototype interventions, and then we built a scaling plan to scale this up across an entire province. And so I think it's the maturity of being able to do that full system level kind of transformation work and to do it at scale, from end to end, and not just kind of produce a pretty systems map and a couple of prototypes that are kind of like tabletop prototypes, but actually drive real change. And that involves dealing with like power dynamics and dealing with blended funding stacks and governance. Like these are the material of doing systemic design today. It's dealing with all of those kind of issues.
Thank you, Alex, for highlighting those points. Palak, would you like to also add something there?
I think what you mentioned, Alex, about being able to do a proper systemic design project where you have the mandate to do that full work, I think that's so rare to come by in a private sector practice. I mean, I would say it's also rare to come back in a public sector practice. So, I mean, it sounds amazing that you were able to do that. And I think for anyone who's starting with systemic design, a project like that would be amazing to, learn from. I think sadly in today's practice, I feel like a lot of what you end up doing is more of a Trojan horsing way of doing things. Like you go in as a known entity, which is say service designer or innovation advisor, anything that makes people feel comfortable with you. But then Alex is nodding, he knows this. When you go in, given the state of things, you are then, if you have the space, you can then either bring in methods or processes or approaches that allow you to tackle a level of complexity and present them as explorative ways for people to engage with it without sort of scaring the clients away, right? Because in business today, being a known quantity and being able to deliver exactly what's expected is how you are measured in terms of, profitability. So that kind of work is especially hard to do if you're a consultant on the outside. So in my years in Fjord, because we were working in a Nordic setup, I was able to sort of get a team together and start doing some of these experiments with some of our client projects. And I actually presented my learnings a couple of years ago at RST, and we had a lot of similar learnings as you were sharing, Alex. Like building trust and having the power to do things, those end up being one of the most important criteria for you to be able to do systemic design, which is not to say that you can't do it at all. I think for example, in my project right now, one of the things that we are trying to do is something called consequence mapping. So we are able to show the relationship between actions taken or not taken, but then talk about the consequences of those in explicit business terms and try and get some numbers attached to it, because of course business folks love numbers. So if we're able to even give an estimate as to, if you don't do this, it's going to cost you X amount of money, that really makes people sit up and listen. So a lot of it is also about speaking the language that your audience understands. And we, like in my previous consultancy work, I actually found it harder for designers to adopt systemic design because a lot of them felt like they had associations with giga mapping and large complex visualizations, which it looks great but doesn't really translate to actions very easily. However, me and my colleague, we were able to bring business leaders and people who are working with actual financial decision making. They enjoyed systemic design methods a lot, because for them it was very easy to see how planning now can help them with future short term and long term. So yeah, it's been an interesting few years trying to understand this from different point of views, and I don't think there's one clear answer to this. But I would also say that design as a field, as an industry, is evolving all the time. I mean, it's a bit sad that all we hear today about discussions is AI and Figma and this tool and another tool. I feel like that really shortchanges the ability, the capacity of design as a profession to go beyond just, tools and craft. So I'm going to stop there and hand over the mic to Mika.
Thanks, Balak. Yeah, what shall I say? So much to say here. Very much agree with Alex that outcomes are much more important than methods or how or techniques or whatever. I think it's important maybe to talk a little bit about the position from which we engage with systemic design and maybe systems change more broadly. So part of my work is studying examples of teams who have really generated those outcomes that we want and what we learn from that. And part of my work is also that my own engagement with systems change and systemic design. And any of those cases, what you see, there's really a long-term commitment or engagement of those who are promoting that change within that system. So, a project-based consultancy model that is really short-term, I think is really hard to do. And maybe from my own experience, what has worked best for me was actually when I was working in the university context and was applying systemic design through a big challenge that was emerging in that same university context, which was student and staff well-being. And this work actually already started, I think, in maybe 2017, when I was still working in Australia, and we got the opportunity to start working on that challenge. And then later, when I came to the Netherlands, I also got to apply it here at TU Delft. And what the systemic approach to student well-being meant was that usually, student well-being is on the radar, especially since the pandemic of university boards. But the standard approach is quite traditional, mechanistic, individualistic. So what I mean with that is that well-being is seen as something that is separate from education. So, you have education and then we have well-being. So we have education services and we have teachers and then we have well-being services. That's one thing. Then the second thing is that it's seen as something that's belonging to an individual. So an individual student might experience a well-being challenge. And a third thing is that, what we tend to do is then look for linear causes of those well-being issues and then design separate solutions for those linear causes. So there could be maybe a student doesn't know how to look after themselves. Well, we just give them some training for mindfulness, etc. Whilst if you start to dig a little bit deeper into student and staff well-being, it's actually very much interconnected, non-linear challenge that you also need to approach in that way. So education and well-being are not separate. Learning and well-being are not separate, right? Our well-being of a student or a staff member has direct implications for what they learn. The way we shaped our whole education system has direct impact on how a student feels. For example, something like performance culture, just mentioning one thing. Well-being is not just about individuals. It's about how people relate to each other. If you can create a sense of community among students rather than competition, then already a lot of things start to shift. And it's not about, this kind of singular linear causes for well-being issues. You really need to look at all the patterns and how that's related to each other. And also, there's no quick fix. There's no things you can just respond to. You need to kind of build this, I call it a capacity for learning, to learn together what we need to do. So because I was part of this university system for such a long time, I really understood how all these things were working and related to each other. And I also had the opportunity and the mandate to do something because, in Delft, I was like the program director. So I could actually start to implement all kinds of different prototypes where we bring students together, where we bring students and teachers together. They start to talk about well-being in a different way. And then, you get to talk to the right people within the organization who are saying, hey, what you're doing is actually interesting. Can we not also kind of scale this up or, do this in other faculties, etc. Now, what I ran up against in the end was that this also requires quite a fundamentally different way of looking at how we deal with these kind of programs, right? And how they're funded and how they're measured. And that's a whole different story. I'm not good at that at all. And I, started thinking, is it something I should learn, or is it better maybe to, build more on what I'm good at, which is kind of explaining these things to other people and, engage in research and disseminate that knowledge. Whilst in some of the other cases I've studied, also cases in hospital settings where people who were actually working at a hospital really knew how to play also those funding levers, financial levers, or political levers. So that already shows, I think, that systemic design is only just part of the piece of the puzzle, right? If you just think of systemic design as design and systems thinking, yes, that's important. But this whole kind of financial, political, relational work is just another thing that's much broader than just system thinking and design. So I just want to put that discipline within a bit of a broader field. I mean, Palak, she calls herself like a transdisciplinary designer, which is also a term I quite like. It's about how all those different ways of thinking and working come together.
Interesting to hear about your example, Mika. Thank you for sharing about your example. And we have last question, which is where do you think the field is headed, and what do you see as the key blockers and biggest opportunities for its development? So again, Alex, we could go with you first.
Okay, I'll kick it off then. Yeah, I think the future is is hard to predict at this point just because of the level of structural volatility that we're seeing. So I think one of the tensions, we probably all heard the term polycrisis, but I also like the term metacrisis, because I think that directs us to like getting to some kind of underlying deep drivers that are maybe interconnecting these different expressions that we're seeing. And so I think that in this period of of metacrisis and volatility as usual, um, it both increases the need for systemic design and simultaneously erodes the conditions that are required to do it well. Um, the collaboration tends to break down and everyone kind of bunkers down into their own tribal kind of groups. Time horizons collapse and everyone can only just respond to the crisis. Institutions become more reactive. And so it creates a bit of a paradox for us that we've got these problems that demand a systemic response, but the systems that we're embedded in become less capable of producing them. So I do think there's going to be tremendous demand for systemic design in the future, but we don't have the luxury of doing it in the old way. We can't just like even the examples that we've talked about today, they're complex problems, but they're still quite tightly bound into individual sectors. We tend to treat health as completely separate than environment, and as completely separate than economic development, when the research shows how entangled they all are and looking at things systemically should. So, like, we cannot continue to focus on individual complex challenges, and we can't take a decade to shift systems, even though that's like usually how long it takes. Um, so, there's kind of this points to a couple of directions that I think the field needs to advance in. One, we need to extend the field to work better to address the deep drivers and root causes of the meta crisis. And that's really about reimagining our relationship with ourselves, with each other, with the natural world, and with the artificial world. And so I think that's one piece of it. And on the other piece, I've seen like one of the labs that I work with is the Health Commons Solutions Lab here in Toronto, and they work on upstream health equity. And what I've seen them do really well, and it was really exemplified by the pandemic, is the ability to use the tools of systemic design in more of a crisis response mode and to use that crisis as an opportunity for deep structural change. So I think we've often thought of these long consensus-based like processes multi-year, but the tools also can be applied in a rapid response situation. So I think we need to at once like take a long view and go really deep and simultaneously be more responsive to the time demands of the situations we're facing. And maybe I'll just quickly say something about AI because Palak has mentioned it a couple of times and it's in every conversation at the moment. So how is AI affecting systemic design? Well, I think like a lot of like I think we can bring a different lens to the AI conversation, which at the moment is very extractive and it's very driven on hype as well as, fear and risk. And, you've got these narratives around AGI hype as well as massive workforce replacement. But I think like trying to replace human workers with AI is just like fundamentally misguided. And because I see them as different forms of intelligence. And so what I've been looking at in my own practice is what I've been calling braided intelligence. How do we intentionally integrate individual intelligence with collective intelligence, with artificial intelligence? Um, and so I think like if that initial frontier of systemic design was about integrating systems thinking with design thinking, I think the next frontier is how we integrate diverse forms of intelligence to drive positive change at scale that was previously unimaginable.
Looks like Rom is frozen. Maybe Palak, would you like to pick up on anything there?
Yeah, I think yeah, lots of similar thoughts as you, Alex. I think the conditions of the world are going to necessitate for us to be able to do things in ways that are different from the ways that we've done them before. And I think systemic design or the space that it holds within design, where you could experiment and you could try and bring different ways of seeing and doing things from other disciplines, from other people, other new ideas. Like, there's a space in systemic design to be able to experiment with those, and find ways to act upon what we are learning. So I think systemic design offers some tools and opportunities to deal with the kind of challenges that we have in front of us and we are in the middle of. Um, I don't think traditional design as a discipline has the tools to respond. So I think given that, and given the systemic design as a field has been evolving, I think what you said about looking at crisis as a moment or as an opportunity for transformation, it made me think that crisis has always been seen as an opportunity for transformation by, capitalists, for example. Like, there is a whole term called disaster capitalism, right? Which capitalizes on these moments of uncertainty, these moments of fracture in the world, to try and uh, to exploit that as an opportunity. But for us, how we can turn the tables, or how we can flip that a little bit, and instead of having things go towards deeper exploitation, which is kind of how it's going with AI, for example, how can we break that and ask ourselves, is there another way of doing this? Can we use these moments of crisis to give more rights and more opportunities and more possibilities to people who don't have it, as opposed to you know concentrating wealth and power and opportunities in smaller and smaller hands? So yeah, I think being in a space that allows you to ask these questions, and not just from a theoretical point of view, but then be able to transform those things into actions, like rendering intent into action. That's kind of how I see design. So I feel like that's one of the superpowers of design as a field in itself. Like, it allows you to be able to question things, but then it gives you the tools you need to translate those into real interventions, things that you can put out there and get people to interact and react to those, and then change things in that process. So yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the answer to your question, but I feel like there is no one answer really.
That's great. Thank you very much. Mika, is something you'd like to add?
Yeah, so building on what Palak and Alex are saying, I think this shows that it's not either or, but it's and, right? So it's not, is it long term or short term? No, it's both. Is it small or big? No, it's both. Is it technology or human? No, we need both. And I was thinking a bit about what you're saying about these different types of intelligence, Alex, because I think that's important, and particularly when we talk about collective intelligence. I think it's really important that we start looking at these things in different ways. And I was reflecting on this today when I was looking at your publication, Jos, and you have this map with all these people who have something to say about systemic design. And I feel really big unease when I see that map. Because for me, this is not about the individuals, it's about the relationships between those people. So I already explained how I kind of entered this field through Bridget Malcolm, who then introduced me to Alex, who then introduced me to all kinds of other people. And that's how you start to enter this community. And when I say this community, I mean the community that's now called the Systemic Design Association. Now, the SDA at the moment is in a difficult place. because we got really sad news 2 weeks ago that our chair, Marie Davidova, she passed away after an illness, and she was only 46 years old. So I'm still trying to make sense of this, devastating event that happened. And one of the things I was thinking of, I actually don't think Marie is in the map, but that doesn't matter so much because people ask to write about Marie and Marie's work, but it's actually not so many people who write about her work, but more about who she was. And Marie was something, had a really, I would say, funny personality, and she was very enthusiastic, and she was always there at the RSD conferences, and she made everyone feel welcome, and she was really part of this kind of social fabric. And also, she was someone who would always ask the critical questions. She always had a question to ask, and I think what that says about collective intelligence, that it's about these types of relationships, right? It's not just about a bunch of people together who all have something to say, but it's how they relate to each other. It's not just about people who have like great ideas, but it's when they come together, when they ask critical questions, when they invite each other in, when they're welcoming, that you start to create these communities that can then thrive. And I think that's one of the things that is so important in today's world, is that we really are really focused on those human relationships, and that we have to come together, and that we really have to get rid of this idea that we're all in competition with each other, that it's all about winning or losing or making money or becoming a hero or putting people on a pedestal or all these things we say about individual people. Because if we continue doing that, then we're not going to be able to deal at all with this meta crisis we're facing. And I very much agree with the term meta crisis, because this really fundamentally challenges how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we relate to nature, and all those other elements. That's what I'd like to say about that.
That's great. I think so going back to that question, where's kind of systemic design going, or what's the opportunities? I think you're saying introducing social networks in the true sense of the word is very important, and the relationships, quality of the relationships, and so forth. Great. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, just some questions. Just got 5 minutes or so. There's a quick one here from Olivia. When aiming to deliver systemic transformation and move beyond prototypes and systems maps, how are you defining and measuring change? For example, how are you measuring if power dynamics are shifting? Any resources would be helpful. Okay, that's a tough one for you. Who wants to try that one? Alex, I think you provoked this. You're responsible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I think that first of all, mapping flows of resource and power, like it's possible to map these things and therefore to see change. There's been some work. 2 years ago, we had a Future of Labs gathering here in Canada that had about 80 people, and we looked at the last decade of social innovation lab practice in Canada and looked forward to the next decade. And one of the things that came out of that gathering was the idea that we needed a new kind of accountability framework for doing systems change. And there's actually a webinar happening in the next couple of days that will launch the tool that's been co-created with the community here. And so one of the things that like it gives you a way to think about the systemic designers and lab people who hold the container for this kind of work, the clients and sponsors who fund and resource the work, and the communities who are both like have skin in the game. They have the lived experience and they are affected by the complex challenges that we're dealing with. And it gives you a way for thinking about being in right relationship across all of those relationships and it also has a multi-capital model I think I've been talking about it in terms of power asymmetry, but I think a nicer frame is to think about multi-capitals. What are the capitals that different participants in a complex system bring to the table? Because yes, there are some who have power and some who have status, and some who are low status and low power. But people who may be low power may have high legitimacy, because they actually represent a community. And so if you think, and it enables you to think beyond the more than human into natural capital. And so like the other part of this framework is that like to map the different capital assets that you have in the different stakeholder networks, and then how to, as systemic designers, it's our job to kind of mediate, and manage, and create spaces where we can move in a direction that's better for more of the system. And so it's a very tough question, but we have been putting some thought into it in Canada, and this is going to be a Creative Commons framework that's coming out, and so I will look up the link and share it in the chat.
Great. We've just got 2 minutes. I had a quick question or comment, kind of picking up on that and a few other things that have been said. And we've talked a few times about, the constraints of the context that people often work in when they work in design, work in business or public sector or whatever it is. And actually, it's a big theme in our hub. Those kinds of, how do you actually do systemic design when you have such constraints placed upon you? And is part of the future systemic design also about that context? And like, is there a different way of doing that context? You talk about labs, Alex, which is kind of a different framing, isn't it? It's not business as usual kind of context. It's setting different parameters, and you're saying different ways of funding it and so forth is very important, right? Because that's often what it goes back to in business. So I'm not sure if you had any ideas on that. Is that part of the future of systemic design, somehow getting out of the kind of constraints that we often find ourselves in when we're in consultancies and so forth, projects and, KPIs and all of this? Does it require a bit more entrepreneurship so that we can shape those things ourselves? Or does it require labs or some kind of change in that context? I'm not sure. Palak, you also kind of touched upon that. Is there anything you'd like to say on that?
I mean, of course, I think Alex is going to be a lot more, he's going to be able to say a lot more on this than me. I think in my limited experience, I've seen that, yes, there are challenges and constraints, but that's because we compare what we want with what exists today. And of course, what exists today was created in different conditions for different things. So there's going to be a mismatch between the past and the present. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just important to understand what really is a problem and what's not a problem. And also, I think, I mean, it feels like systemic design can be a really hard thing to do, and people talk about being burnt out, they talk about feeling overwhelmed. I think it's important to think about the biggest leverage point that we have in all of this, and which is people. I think even in business contexts and in places with high constraints, if you go to people and talk about possibilities, you will always find people who are interested in working with you on doing things differently. Of course, there'll always be people who are more risk averse and conservative, but there are also people who are champions and who are open-minded and interested in doing things differently. And I think over the years, it's you also always have to keep an eye out for the champion who will work with you on these things. So the more tools, approaches, perspectives you are able to gather yourself, I think you can respond to the situation based on what you know. I think you bring yourself into the situation as well. So the more you know, the more you can bring, and the more are the chances you can inspire and engage people into working with you. It's less about burning through a wall, and it's taking people with you in this space. So that's an imperfect answer, but maybe Alex, you also have some reflections on this.
I know that we're over time, so maybe I'll just give a super quick answer. I actually think like labs create their own kind of problem, which is kind of like this silo within organization. It creates a subculture to create difference, but then that difference isolates it from the organization. I think mission-driven approaches like Mariana Mazzucato and Christian Besson have been like leading. Like these are quite powerful for creating a very different structure. The UNDP's work on portfolios over projects, and interesting, like a lot of the people I now know who used to be part of labs are doing what I'm doing, which is freelance consulting. Ironically, it seems easier to kind of swarm around problems as freelance agents of systems change than it is to build a big platform. The sustainability and the business model is just very hard. So I find that I have much more liberation to and much more ability to affect systems change, ironically, as a free agent.
Thank you, Alex, for that. I think we have a lot more questions here from the audience as well, and even from us. Let's look at this as a conversation starter, and looking forward to many more collaborations in future and taking the field forward together in different formats. With this, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today and taking time and sharing. Thank you, the panel members, for sharing all the insights. We're super, super fortunate to have you today. I've just shared a link to our next event in the chat box. It's going to be about this how to apply systemic design cards to complex challenges. It's going to be a workshop, hands-on workshop for about 90 minutes. And looking forward to having you all there as well. With that, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and see you in our next event.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.